Everyone probably expected bushfires. I don't think we had any idea of what was coming, the scale of what was coming in terms of how huge it was.
I mean, we watched this fire come for a month. It was probably the last couple of weeks that I was believing people who were telling me that it's not going to be stopped.
Well, it gets dark. It's really hot. The hard thing about going to fires is generally where you're driving into fires and everyone else is getting the hell out of there. We obviously had people coming into the station here that had lost their homes and lost everything. And the crazy thing was some of those people actually brought in gifts for us even though they'd lost everything. So it was very moving.
Australia is regularly ravaged by fires of great intensity, scale and destructive force, but the Black Summer Bushfires was something the country had never experienced before. 3 billion animals devastatingly perished, over 39 million hectares of land were burnt, and 3,000 homes destroyed. 33 lives were lost directly due to the fires, and the smoke caused a further estimated 445 deaths. Over 11,000 fires tore through the state of New South Wales from July 2019, making it the worst bushfire season ever recorded. The country was unrecognisable. I'm currently heading to the small town of Kangaroo Valley, located 2 hours south of Sydney. Driving down the main street, the town seems untouched by fire, but as you head to the west side is when you'll notice the destruction. David Smart, or Dusty as the townsfolk call him, is the captain at Kangaroo Valley's Rural Fire Brigade and has offered to show me where the fire hit.
Sort of what happened. It literally come through from behind us and went straight across the river. You can see how hard it burnt over there and then up towards Winslow and those areas that also got burnt out. And chased us down the road essentially. We ended up on one of our trucks stuck out behind the fire. We were trapped out there for the night. They were in a nice safe area that come back in the township, and I think I had about 45 trucks there waiting for me. Down this road there was a wedding venue called Bush Retreat. It got totally burnt out. So it would have been, I don't know how many cabins I had in here, about 15 or so cabins at least.
The Currowan fire had already been burning for 39 days when it eventually reached Kangaroo Valley on the 4th of January.
Well, for the Currowan fire, basically, which our involvement was from sort of November onwards. So we spent about 6 weeks thereabouts on 6 or 7 weeks on the same fire, and we pretty much had a truck on the fire almost every day. so organising crews. So we started down sort of an area around Broome, sort of Tamil area. So it's about 2 hours drive south of Kangaroo Valley, so the very bottom southern reaches of the Shoalhaven. And then slowly worked our way up the coast, set up through Conjola and Milton back to Nara, and then ended up in the valley.
Dusty said they had been watching the fire over the mountains in the morning, and by nightfall the valley was overrun.
Yeah, Kangaroo 1, just letting you know we're organising crews to come take over from you so you can be released when they arrive. Yeah, thanks for that, mate.
I mean, it was a long drawn out lead up, but the short time frame, I suppose, was in the week or so before, I guess, where it did take a couple of runs, so to speak, close to Nara, which is not far from Kangaroo Valley. And there was an awareness then that it was probably going to cross the Shoalhaven River. It was out in the remote western regions with just no resources or roads out there to attack it, so there was no way of stopping it. There was a hope that the Shoalhaven River may pull it up, but it wasn't real likely.
These are just some of the scenes that the Kangaroo Valley Rural Fire Service witnessed while fighting the fires.
I think there was a couple of fire towns impacted further south, which gave people a real wake-up call. A lot of times they hear emergency warning and don't pay a lot of attention about evacuating, but that gave them a real wake-up call that it can and probably will happen. Yeah. So people heeded that, and that was probably I suppose it saved any loss of life sort of thing. The town was almost a ghost town sort of thing. Most people, particularly in the western areas of the valley, did take the advice and leave.
One of those people to take the advice and leave was Alison Baker. She runs a holiday getaway business from her property in the valley and lost 2 cottages, most of the infrastructure and her family home in the fires.
It was what it was, so we left and went to Wollongong for a few days and basically came back ready to rebuild. You just follow your nose, you have a lot of friends in the community who help you out in the initial stages where everything is just black and you're not really sure where to start. But I don't think I really know, or I have a memory of the emotion involved. We made good decisions and didn't lose our lives and didn't, lose our dog or most of the animals we had on the property, that we kept and fed, not the wildlife, survived. And so after, a short amount of time, we picked ourselves up and just got on with it.
Meanwhile, 4 hours south at UOW's Bega campus, campus manager Sam Abatea had quite a different evacuation experience.
For myself, it was just a decision of security and safety. So my property wasn't under immediate threat, but the area that I live in was, and I have 2 children, so I thought, well, I'm just going to go to a space where I feel safer and that I can see better. The radio was saying, get yourself to a major town. Anyone who lives in the outlying regions, get yourself to one of the major towns. So I made the decision to come into work. When I got to work, I put out the call to everyone else, if you need to come in here, come in. By midnight that night, we had over 50 people here.
The 50 people who had sheltered at the campus ended up sleeping there for the next 3 days. They all came up with different ways to distract themselves from what was happening outside.
We kind of split it up like a little bit of a hotel. So as more and more people arrived, it'd be like, okay, well, you can have this classroom, or you can have Sally's office. You've only got 2 of you, or you've got 3 of you. So why don't you go in Rebecca's office, or why don't you go in this classroom? And just to give everyone a little bit of space for themselves as well, as much as we could. We knew if it filled up anymore, that space would become less and less and less, but just trying to give people a bit of space, because everyone was very anxious and we didn't want the kids to feel that as well. So we were trying to make it a bit of like a camp for the kids. You know, we had movies on and they were playing soccer in the hallways and that sort of thing. But as the days went on and the smoke got thicker and thicker, and all we could see on the news reports and TV was just like, this is a really, really bad emergency. You think you need to be here. We could see people we knew on the television trapped in place. It got very scary.
The fires didn't only affect the human population, but also the native flying fox population. Janine Davies is the Flying Fox Coordinator at Wildlife Rescue South Coast and the Shoalhaven Bat Clinic and Sanctuary. She believes around 15,000 to 20,000 flying foxes died during the Black Summer Bushfires in the Bomaderry region alone.
With the flying foxes in particular, they had already started to experience an excessively dramatic starvation event, which meant that a lot of them came down here earlier than what they should have. By the time they arrived, they were starving, which meant that they were giving birth to malnourished young, and a lot of those babies were falling off. So the fires meant that it was pushing them further south at the time, and then once we had the fires down south, it meant that their food sources were being restricted, and they were all within our area. Numbers to die, we have no idea, because what happens with a fire is if the animals are hanging during the day, they wrap themselves up and a fire could just come through and take them out, and they may not have the time to fly out. We only had one individual that had burns out of all that time. It was just the one animal, so that's an indication of the numbers that were more than likely lost. The animals that we lost were affected from the fire, but that was, like I said before, all involving with starvation as well. The fires would have been the final straw, and then we had a heat stress event up in Kangaroo Valley, and there was probably 8,000 to 10,000 died on that one day.
By March 2020, towns had begun to rebuild, rehabilitate and restart. The towns were thriving with tourists that were putting money back into the struggling economy and helping bushfire-hit communities get their lives back on track and regain a sense of normalcy. But by March 22nd, Australia was dealt another blow, the coronavirus pandemic.
Life is changing in Australia as it is changing all around the world. Life is going to continue to change as we deal with the global coronavirus.
Coronavirus is spreading rapidly across Australia.
New restrictions come into place tonight in Australia in the effort to control the spread of coronavirus.
Restricting gatherings and movement in a bid to slow the coronavirus.
Now these communities were dealing with 2 1-in-100-year events in only a matter of months.
Well, I think things were fairly grim after the fires, of course. Nobody was coming through the village, and so things were very quiet. And I know that my friend had to put off 2 of her workers, and then COVID obviously hit. So initially it was very, very quiet, but actually it's been booming for the last 3 months, because obviously everybody is encouraged to travel locally. It's what they're doing, and so particularly school holidays, long weekend, and so I think the business has probably had its better year than the last 6.
Owner and head chef of Hampton Deli also said after everything, his business has done better than ever.
So it's been a roller coaster year from being, a good start to the year, then fires, then trough of sort of COVID and fires, and now we're back on the incline. So to date, we're actually up probably from where we were last year, and we look at that from the reason that people aren't going overseas. We're not really even allowed to go out of the border, sort of over the borders, out of the state. So people are coming into these beautiful areas and spending money. So, it's sort of shocked us so much that we've caught us on the back foot. We've got enough staff, we're just pushing, we're trying to keep up. So, it's a very good thing, we're not complaining.
Despite losing her family home and having to close her business all year, Alison has also rebuilt most of her damaged property and expects to be up and running again by December.
So we've basically said for some months now, but maybe even back in January, that we would open for the 1st of December. And that's what we're focusing on. And so there was only one cottage, this one here, that we're rebuilding, and most of the other infrastructure is well on its way to being of the standard that we require. So all going well, that's exactly what will happen. So our website says we'll be open from the 1st of December, and we have bookings out from there. So you can see that we've got feed down here.
Yeah.
A bit of rain would be particularly useful right now.
Mm-hmm.
So all these cottages are basically the same. This is interesting because this is a slab that the cottage is built on.
Yeah.
And we've kept that slab. So when you look in here, the slab has been polished, and you can see all the markings of where the tiles were before.
Mm-hmm.
So we think that's quite a feature.
Yeah.
So we've kept that. That's the finished floor there. Our olive grove over here has not featured so well. We've done some efforts at trying to see whether it will produce fruit again by pruning. A couple of different systems we've got going, but at the moment we've not really got any idea whether we'll ever have fruit from there again.
Many people have said their community has also become a lot closer after going through these major events.
Yeah, look, the community has always been, it's quite an eclectic community. So lots of part-timers, full-timers, generations that have been here, plus lots of people moving in from the city. Yeah. So it's a really eclectic community, but actually quite, the bushfires really brought the community together. Massively so. Big rural fire brigade, so of course, with huge respect for them, the locals that were protecting the properties, and then from the wildlife initiative group to people, setting up a community centre effectively and an information centre to bring in, sort of helping people fill out forms and applications and government funding, and it was just phenomenal. People dropping in food parcels and providing accommodation, that side of it I think was extraordinary. And so therefore it was quite gelled, as a community even more so. And then COVID, I think, it was just a natural progression to support and keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very strong community here. It's unlike almost any other town I think I know of, and most people know of. The people really do go out of their way to help each other. We obviously had people coming into the station here that had lost their homes and lost everything, and the crazy thing was some of those people actually brought in gifts for us even though they'd lost everything, so it was very moving.
Although physical recovery is going well for the town of Bega, Sam says the community is still mentally recovering from the trauma of what they went through.
Everybody's different, so it's really interesting. I was talking to one of the local psychologists the other day, and they said they're still getting first-time referrals. So people who went through the bushfires who hadn't sought support until 10 months later. I think it's going to be a long a long haul for a lot of people. A lot of people went just into coping mechanism, and now they're gone into kind of what's next, and dealing with grief and loss obviously takes a long time. And I think that it's going to be a couple of summers before everyone can breathe more easily. There's still a lot of anxiety, even amongst people like myself who didn't go through huge trauma. Even I find myself getting anxious if I see smoke or smell smoke, or so I think it's going to be quite some time before that changes.
One thing that is giving a sense of hope though is the burnt bushland that has sprung back to life and started to regenerate.
You know, it's greened up, we've had rain, so that's been really wonderful, like mentally, to be able to see some green, even though it's not everywhere.
The bush has regenerated in a massive way. It's been inspirational to watch how the Australian bush just redevelops and regrows.
Although the Black Summer Bushfires are the worst fires Australia has ever recorded, bushfires are nothing new, but they are changing. Claire Yao has worked at the Bureau of Meteorology for over 20 years and has witnessed fire seasons changing over the decades.
So when I first started 20 years ago, and I'll use Victoria as an example, our fire season here in Victoria was typically from December until around about March.
Yeah.
Now our fire seasons have typically started when I say fire seasons, as in fires starting and then becoming out of control or difficult to manage for the fire agencies. Now that sort of starts in September and often doesn't finish until May. And so that's a huge change that I've seen even in my relatively short period of being a meteorologist.
Fire and Rescue New South Wales Duty Commander Gary Power has also noticed these changes while fighting fires over the years.
It seems to be things are getting worse and more common. I don't know whether they're always going to be like last year. We always have flare-ups. Last year was the worst season I've experienced.
Claire says these changes are largely due to climate change and global warming.
Number one, climate change. I don't think there's any doubt around that. There might be a lot of information out there that's misinformation about what is happening, but at the end of the day, if you're just looking at pure scientific fact, we've seen an increase in temperature when you look at the average each year. The increase has been sharper towards this last period, so the last 20 years. So, you know, once you start warming the planet up, once you start getting those hotter temperatures, then you start to get much bigger weather systems.
Even though these fires are becoming harder and harder to put out, Gary says there are valuable lessons learnt when doing so.
There's always lessons learned for when you go to fires, and you learn from your experiences. But the thing is, I suppose these days, the ability to share those experiences and those lessons learned among crews. Back in the day, I've been doing this for 35 years, guys would just tell the guys on the station, but now there's feedback and drill sessions that are prepared regarding particular aspects of firefighting based upon those experiences. So, yeah, and I think our personal protective equipment's getting a lot better. We didn't have good air filtration, but that's now been introduced as a result of those fires. Yeah. So we used to the bushfire, we'd wear breathing apparatus, which is only good for about 20 minutes.
Wow. That's not very
so then the next backup was a P2 mask, so we're now going to a mask with P3s, so filtration things, which are good for 8 hours. So So that's a good outcome.
As we are currently experiencing the La Nina weather event, Claire says it will help reduce the risk of this year's fire season.
So the La Nina that the patterns that we're seeing at the moment are very similar to previous, what we call La Nina, the La Nina pattern in previous years. Going by all the evidence, we're likely to see more rainfall, and we're starting to see that being the case now. But the difference is that we'll see that consistent rainfall through the whole, what we call fire weather season. So we're less likely to see, there's a less chance of seeing what we saw last summer, where we didn't have that early rainfall in spring. Whereas this spring, we have started to see that early onset of rainfall.
Although this year has been harder than most and unlike any other we've seen before, the Black Summer Bushfires and COVID-19 has shown the true strength of the Australian people.
I think that there will be a lot taken out of this year for young and old. It's a bit of a reset, and I think there's an opportunity for people to reset their way forward, their goals,